I think the hardest part about like particularly that kind of news cycle and stepping away from it, there were two things that happened. One is realizing what it is that is stressing a person out, and what stresses you out is the helplessness. You can't fix it, the things that are going wrong. And the second one is that, hang on, let me see if I can get this right. You can't fix it, and you also feel simultaneously responsible for knowing about it. In other words, if you're not I'm a history teacher, and if I'm not listening to the news, then how irresponsible is that? And what I realize is it's not particularly irresponsible at all. Most of the time, if something really matters, I will find out about it anyway. So no, I don't walk around with my cell phone all the time.
Yeah, I think the piece where you need it is really where it starts to cross the line a little bit. I think if you're in a place where we can use it without it controlling us, then we can still be in a safe space. I've kind of gone on the extreme side of not following any news service. I think about a year ago, I realized that it's not necessarily that knowing what's happening is bad, but I think the way it's portrayed to us and given to us or like curated to us is where the problem lies, because there is, I think the way they design the news is to exaggerate it way past the point where it's worse than you think it is.
Right.
And the second point is that everything that's happening everywhere in the world right now, where, for example, 200, 300 years ago, even if there was the exact same amount of bad things that were happening, you just wouldn't know about it, and you'd live a much more peaceful life. But,
yeah. In the American Civil War, 1861 to 65, at that time period, most people in America had never been more than 20 miles away from their home. And they had, just as you said, news traveled by word of mouth. So a lot of the times that just means it didn't travel. And I'm not entirely sure people were worse off for all of that. I mean, what you just said reminds me of my parents lived in Rhode Island, and one of the things about that I remember growing up were these terrible storms that would come in. Like, you probably, I don't know how much you would say remember of like the last big storm that really hit us hard. It was like
maybe Sandy. Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I remember it. I was pretty young, but I remember
it. Were you living locally?
Yeah, it was about 40 minutes from here. I was up in Somerset, yeah.
And did it hit where you were?
Yeah, it was pretty bad. I mean, I remember we'd have the news on at that time as well, just like listening to how bad like it was. But it was raining hard, yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess very distinct images of being on this campus during that, but just to finish the point that I was making before, that there were two, Hurricane Sandy didn't really tear up Rhode Island, but there were other hurricanes that did. And even when I was a little kid, people used to talk about these hurricanes as if, like they would speak about a world war. And nobody in those time periods had any idea that those storms were coming. Hurricane Sandy, we knew a week in advance that we could be getting hit. And so all of the shelves on the grocery stores, by the time Hurricane Sandy hit, were just empty. And people buying generators, and of course Home Depot sells that, all that sort of stuff. So there's this like, instead of a 6-hour window of warning, there was a 6-day window of warning, and it completely changed the metric. But in another way, I wouldn't be surprised if my wife and I like retire this time next year. We've been doing this for 36 years now, and I'm just like, we don't have to be here anymore, and there are lots of other things to do. But when I start kind of cherry picking my great big Rolodex of memories, and some of those are the storms, and in fact, this has to do with the technology.
In more of a positive way, you mean, when you look back?
Yes, entirely, because the power went out. Here's what happened. Is this okay?
Tell me. Tell me. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, all right. The first time I actually understood that we were going to get hit hard. Storms come all the time. Most of the time, the hurricanes, these things are called nor'easters. And what happens is they come up through the Gulf of Mexico. And what they're following, if you actually look at a satellite image, is like a bowling alley. They come right up the Ohio Valley and then spill out someplace in New England, usually. So they call them nor'easters because they come from the southwest and they're heading to the northeast. and then sometimes they make their way up the coast, and almost always they skip past New Jersey. And if you look at the map, you can kind of see why that happens. They bounce off the Carolinas and keep going. Every now and then, something takes one of those storms and bends it like you're getting your arm twisted and slams it into the coast. But most of the time it doesn't happen. And there's so many false alarms that after a while you're just like, well, I'll believe it when I see it. But, so even on the evening when they were saying, get into your houses, go home early, make sure you have, fill the bathtub with water because we don't know how that's going to be. Not be any fresh water for weeks or days or whatever. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to believe it when I see it. But about an hour before the storm hit, something happened which I had heard. It was a sound before. The mosquito screens in the window started droning like bees. There was no wind, but the mosquito screen started humming, and it was totally creepy. But I had heard that before. In order to pay my way through university, worked on deep sea fishing boats for 6 years, basically all the way through freshman year and then into graduate school and every summer and winter and spring break and all that stuff. And there was a time when we were out on the water and the ocean was just kind of heaving itself up much more than usual. It still wasn't a storm. But then the rigging of the boat, which is all metal cables, started droning like bees. And I said to one of the old timers on the boat, I said, "Oh, we're gonna get hit." And I said, "What are you talking about?" They're like, it's rough, but it's no storm. And it's like, no, that's sound. And the weird thing is that it's being made by wind, but it's wind that you can't feel. And then sure enough, an hour or two later, we literally had to rope ourselves to the boat because otherwise we'd run washed overboard. So the storm was coming at that point, and then about half an hour before it hit, do you know Ms. Green, Marisa Green?
I do, yeah. She was my teacher freshman year.
Right. We heard this knocking on the door, and she came to the door, and she had an enormous rucksack on and her laptop. And we were like, and she just didn't want to be alone, which is totally fine, because otherwise she was by herself. She came in and spent the night in our house, but she opened up her laptop and she was showing us a Doppler radar image of the Jersey Shore. And you could if you've lived here long enough, you can make out where Belmar is and Manasquan and all those things. And there was this enormous circular ball, bladed at the edges like a rotary saw blade, and it was coming right at us. And at that point, I knew that everything was about to stop. This is circling back to how this actually turned out to be a good thing for the school, so I haven't forgotten the plot. But there's a style of talking called the Southern oratorical style, which means that you circle backwards. You have to remember where you started. So I haven't forgotten. When it got dark, the wind started up, and about an hour in, we started hearing two things. One was this terrible, wrenching, cracking sound. And it wasn't the sound of a branch going down. That's a particular sound. This was a sound that I had not heard before. And what it was a sound of entire trees getting wrenched out of the ground. One of the things that happened is it was late in the year, maybe October, but the leaves hadn't fallen. So the trees, especially these big ones on campus, became like the sails of ships. And it carried the entire tree out of the ground. So you can still, if you drive, I don't know, you're not a day student.
I'm a boarder.
Oh yeah, but say on your way home, if you look into the forest, you can still see the remains of trees that were torn out of the ground with their entire root systems intact. Wow. So that there were these, literally as tall as the ceiling here, so 10.
Well, I think I've gone on some trail hiking, and I've seen some of those, but I never thought about the origin.
Those came from Hurricane Sandy. Those were not there before that. And what happened was that the root systems came up with these enormous discs of soil. So they were everywhere. And when those trees came down, and they were coming down. I mean, there's a house just across the Peddie Bridge, took a tree right through the middle. It was literally as if somebody karate chopped a birthday cake. That's what it looked like. And anyway, then there was another sound, which was a crackling sound. This electrical kind of splintering sound. The thing I would compare it to, I actually heard this morning. I have like a morning bicycle ride. I go for 12 miles.
Oh, nice.
And when it's raining, and when I go under those great arrays of power lines, there's a road down here called Cedarville, and I go under this array of power cables, and in the rain, those power cables crackle. They crackle like bacon cooking. And I could hear them, but it seemed to be coming from everywhere. And I looked out, and what I saw was the sky flashing a color that I had never seen in the sky before, and it was turquoise. Like this brilliant bluish. It was beautiful.
Is this during the hurricane or
yes,
just
it's right when it's like at the height of the hurricane, and it was beautiful, but it was also terrible because all these things were happening that were completely out of the zone of normality, and so the sky began flashing turquoise, and it literally looked like Morse code. Like something, like literally some kind of a message. And I thought to myself, are they flashing some kind of warning signal to us or something? And then the turquoise went dark, the sky turned vivid, I'll explain what this was in a sec, but it turned vivid red, like cranberry juice, like the whole sky. And then all the lights went out. And what was happening, and this is in a weird way where it became both terrible and wonderful at the same time. What was happening is there's a generator station, and those generator stations have transformers. The transformers are as big as the desk that separates us now, and there are hundreds of them. Those transformers have begun arcing. If you'd been standing in that transformer field, you'd have been cooked, because they were arcing, literally lightning bolts flying from one to the other. And then the whole thing blew up.
Oh,
all
wow.
the transformer fields, if you had walked to the transformer field afterwards, you would literally have seen a smoldering ruin of what had once been the power source of this entire area. And it's terrible, but it was also marvelous, because all of a sudden, this interview would have been impossible. Cell phones, forget about it. Computers gone, no internet, no phone. We were literally back in the 1800s. Because here's what happened. Everybody has a flashlight. That flashlight lasts 3 hours, and then you're done. And nobody has any refrigeration. And how do you do that? The water, that didn't go off immediately, but nobody had any gasoline, because the power pumps in the gasoline are electrically powered. So it literally, everything that you normally take for granted went evaporated. Things changed by the end of the first day. We had no power, but this building had power because
the Long Street?
Yes, Long Street. And this place actually became, for me and my family, as I have a son and a daughter, we have no refrigeration. So if we don't eat the food on that day, it's all gone. The supermarkets were closed. The school was busy, like, serving up food that had been, stuck in the freezer for forever. I don't even know how they managed it. There is, behind us, a little room, and there either is or was a little mini fridge. And I knew about that, and I knew that most people didn't know that there was a mini fridge in there. So that became our, secret fridge. But also, the other thing about it, and this is kind of where it became wonderful, all of the day students were sent home, and some of them were beyond the range of distractions, so they went back to a perfectly normal life. A lot of the parents got so tired of having to deal with their kids at home that they started dropping them off on campus. So we had kids just wandering around the campus.
In the storm?
Well, after the storm.
Okay.
And So the entire Jersey Shore has been torn to shreds. There were literally houses drifting out to sea. That's how crazy it was. If you've been to Belmont, have you ever been to Belmont? Okay. The entire sort of seafront was gone, just gone. All of the houses boarded up, and they stayed that way for about a year and a half. So it lasted a really long time. But the part that was wonderful is how unimportant technology became. And this is going back to the beginning. Anybody who was here then remembers this one night when, after just a week of trying to keep the students occupied, they decided to have a talent show in the dining hall. And what was wonderful, so we had light in the dining hall. I was at that point using oil lamps. I had an old oil lamp, and at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when it started to get dark, I would find myself putting things where I knew I could find them in the dark. Normally, just turn on the light, where are my keys? But over there, when it's dark, no flashlight, no candles. I had to know where stuff was as if I was blind. And the dining hall had electricity, but anybody who could do anything just came and entertained. People sang songs. The headmaster, who's not Mr. Quinn, but a previous man named Mr. Green, who was here for Founders Day. It was that guy with the tall guy with big snow.
Yeah, I remember.
Anyway, he had a play Monopoly or tic-tac-toe with the headmaster. So all these people would line up to play tic-tac-toe and see if they could beat the headman. And there was a woman who was a French teacher, and everybody remembers this. She had been a floor manager at J. Crew, Princeton, which is, I don't know if it's still there. And she taught us how to fold a sweater. And everybody thought that was hilarious. So when I look back on the years that I've been here, and I think about the illusion of dependence, and frankly, the damage caused by that illusion, I am sometimes reassured by how unimportant it can become. And I still think that there are other things, on the other hand, which speak to the exact opposite. And I think that your generation is still, we are, and you are, still trying to figure out how much damage COVID did to you. And I'm not talking about like getting sick. I'm talking about the lack of camaraderie, the lack of physical contact, this terrible. There was a point. Maybe you remember it. I don't know, but when everybody had to be 6 feet apart on campus.
I remember very clearly.
Right, and I can remember. I was talking to my students in my class yesterday about this, about like it had to do with like the physical distance of things, how you and I are sitting 6 feet apart, which is, it's actually the normal thing, and it's a very primordial response. The reason you and I both feel safe is that we're not within arm's reach of each other. If I come within arm's reach of you, you know it's fine, but you're also not fine with it. And like do you know Araf Bardwaj?
Oh, I do, yeah.
You should ask, if you know him well, ask him, because I used him as a guinea pig yesterday to show what happens. I was talking about the discipline on British ships in the 1700s. It's a class on piracy, but it was this draconian discipline, and a lot of it had to do with the idea of physical space. Like, you don't approach an officer, you don't get within 6 feet, hand's breadth of an officer. And the reason for it is because of this kind of, it's primordial. We don't talk about it because everybody immediately understands it. But if you get into someone's space, they immediately become uncomfortable. Yes. But if you're close with someone, if you're with a friend, then you deliberately get within space. And the other thing is, if you're facing someone, you tend to keep a natural sense of distance. That wasn't the problem on the campus. If we all spent the whole time facing each other, it wouldn't have been a problem. It's walking side by side. Like, even if you don't know somebody, you don't walk 6 feet apart. You walk side by side. This is what we've been doing for 10,000 years. And my study is out the window there. It's a part of the building. It was actually built for me years ago. They built me a study, which was just this wonderful thing. Separate story, but I get this kind of weird. It's like being in a lighthouse, and my eyes are the light because I can see out in this vast array across campus. And what would happen is people are sitting out here where you guys sit, where the basketball hoop is, and a faculty member would come along, and I wouldn't hear what was being said, but I know they're like, somebody's like, you stay apart, don't keep, stop, and then they would go away, and the students just drift back together again because they can't help it. And
it's just natural, right? Human nature.
I know, it's just perfectly natural. And on the one hand, it's like this kind of, it was just this hopeless task that literally became kind of tragicomic after a while, but it had an effect, and I think that we're still trying to figure out what it did to you is worse than it did to me.
Right.
Because I knew, you now know what it's like, and you had an idea of it before, but it took from you that ease of movement and of being physically in a place in the world and being able to travel and explore things that I could take it for granted. I knew at some point unless we all just die, we're going to be able to go back to doing that. But this was happening to you at a time when everything is starting to be new. And it is when you're growing up. You're trying to figure out how to live in your own skin, trying to figure out how to live in the world. You're always uncertain. And have that added uncertainty brought in.
I think the thing with COVID as well is that it amplified the illusion of dependency that you wrote about.
Oh, yeah.
Because I just remember, it was definitely the usage of technology was growing for decades, like maybe since 2010 really when the social media boom started to happen. But I think what happened in COVID was that I was right at the end of my 8th grade. So it was just the spring term of my 8th grade year, at the end of my middle school, and we all were going online. We don't know how long it would be, but when you're not allowed to leave the house for 3 months, like I might have taken it to another extreme where I literally did not leave my house to even go on a walk in my community.
That's
true. Yeah. I maybe went out like once a month. I was inside, indoors, and if you're just a normal 8th grade, 9th grade kid that is unable to go and be with his friends and socialize, like what will he go to? He will go to his phone and videos and movies and video games.
Right.
Because you have a craving inside, especially when you're young, to socialize with people. And if your only source of that is through the internet and technology,
you're missing this entire dimension.
It went up to an exponential level where my sleep schedule, I would sleep at like 4 or 5 in the morning, wake up 11, 1, laze throughout the day, call my friends at 8 o'clock, we're playing video games again. And I mean, I played like video games before in middle school, but I think it just amplified it to such a degree where it took me a long time to heal from that. Because
do you feel healed now?
I do, and I can get to that part as well.
Yeah.
I would say that when I came to Peddie my freshman year, I was unprepared in terms of being able to socialize. Because although I was a very happy social kid in middle school, I didn't realize how much of an impact 4 months of isolation had on me.
Can you help me out there?
Right.
Where were you in your education when, at this point where you were still in middle school when you were not leaving the house? I've lost track.
Right. So 8th grade year, COVID hit in March. So we have 3 terms in our middle school in each year, so kind of like Peddie, right? Fall, winter, spring. So the spring term was pretty much all online, and the entire summer. The spring term was all online, and all of summer I was at home. So it was pretty much at the end. It was right at a pivotal point as well because I was transitioning from 8th grade to 9th grade, so going from my middle school, which is small, 30 people, to a high school like Peddie.
That's very small.
Yeah. And I think I came to Peddie, first of all, it was not a normal school year with us being hybrid, 1 week online, 1 week on campus. I was a day student at the time, so I'd be driving back and forth every day. Barely had enough time to be here, but I came to a weird spot where I was really addicted to technology. and I was unable to connect with people because I kind of lost that touch of how you're actually supposed to socialize with someone. But I think with time it got better. I think by the time I came to my sophomore year, it got better. But I would say that even when I look around, even though I feel healed in terms of my finally ability to socialize with people, to feel comfortable in that way, I think that a lot of society has not been healed in terms of the addiction to technology.
At what point did you feel like you were okay again?
Sophomore year, I would say. It took me a year, but I would say there's two parts to it. I would say the first part of it was like coming out of that bubble that I was trapped in, of inability to connect with people. That I overcame my sophomore year. I just think it came with improving my self-image a little bit. And I think when I did some things for myself and I saw that I can improve my life if I took some actions, that immediately put me on the exponential curve of positive self-image, which I think just takes off, and then you can keep proving to yourself that you're worthy, and you can socialize with people, and you can end up like going on to achieve more things. So I'd say the first part of it, I was healed in sophomore year. Really, the thing that healed me was finding a friend group that I really fit in and socialize with. But I would say the second part of it is the healing of technology addiction. That I would say I think 99% of people are in that bubble right now, where like 3 or 4 hours screen time on their phone. The need to just like kind of watch TikToks and movies, which I think is a whole nother problem. But I would say about a year ago, I started to realize like the problem I had with phone usage and internet usage. And as I mentioned, I started watching a lot of podcasts, and one of the themes of a lot of the podcasts was the impact that technology is having on us. And over time, as the more and more I learned about the damages the phone is doing to us, I even went to reduce as much of my screen time as possible. And
how successful were you?
Pretty successful, I would say. I think my screen time now is about 20 to 30 minutes on my phone.
So what did you do without? What did you erase from your dependence previously?
I would say that I never obsessed about lowering my screen time, but the more and more I learned about the impact it was having on me, the more and more I took decisions that inevitably ended up lowering it. Right? Like, for example, it might have started with incorporating parts of the day where I wouldn't use it. And I think the big change happened when last spring, I like to make like systems and stuff in my life. I think it helps me to simplify life. And one of the systems I made for myself was that every time I picked up my phone, I have to read a page of a book. It's like a fun little game I played with myself, and I realized the first day I was reading like 40 pages, like I'm picking it up so many times. But I think that really drastically reduced it from like 3 hours a day on my phone to what it's now, like 20, 30 minutes a day. And it's at a point where I don't feel like I'm addicted to it anymore, because before it's like, okay, you sit down, you're bored in a room, you have to pick it up and scroll. But now I feel like if I'm waiting in line somewhere, or I'm like waiting for the bus to come, I don't feel the urge to just pick it up and scroll. I'm happy just being there, present in the moment. And I would say that is one of the biggest triumphs I've faced. I don't know if I've achieved like much success in other areas like so far in terms of like what I want to achieve in my life, but I think one of the triumphs I can give to myself that I'm proud about is the fact that I'm able to destroy the addiction and have like control over my body again. And I only bring that up because I think that if you look around like at our generation, at least kids in high school, it's really hard to do that. I think that a lot of kids feel that they need to be there all the time. They're dependent on it. And if they're not on social media, if they're not following what their friends are doing all the time, if they're not on TikTok, they're gonna miss out and they're gonna fall behind.
Do you feel like the school is doing an adequate job of what you've talked about is something that you've done on your own, and clearly something came along to make you decide.
It's okay.
Someone's trying to get through.
Yeah.
You made this personal decision. It seems to me that the school has not instilled a similar mindset as part of their policy. Do you feel like the school could have done more, or should have done more, or should be underlining it? I mean, I just said I didn't watch it, but you spent an hour talking to Onion, who was presumably talking about something quite similar about the damage that's being done. But do you feel like the school was helping you or hurting you?
I would say that when I made the decision, it was not aligned with anything I was doing in school. It was kind of separate, but I think incorporating school puts us in an interesting place with will it help people or hurt people. Because I think that whenever there is a message that's sent from the school to students about phone usage, it's kind of, people just jump to like, I don't want to listen to it, like I don't want to worry about it. Especially if Onion comes up in chapel and tells you to stop using your phone, that's going to make people want to use their phone more. And I think that what was powerful for me was that I think I did it for myself, which really helped me to do it. I didn't feel like I was doing it for anyone else. I didn't do it for some authority figure telling me that you need to do this. But I think where the education can come in and be useful is if you don't start by educating with the harms of the phone, but you start by educating like the power and joy you can find in life through presence. And I think the phone is just one part of it that's stealing that. But
so your friend group, the one that you managed to create for yourself at sophomore year, have they followed your example, or were you following their example?
Well, these are two separate stories because the phone usage came the next year. And I was not in the same friend group at the time, so when I was in that friend group, I was still like using my phone quite a bit. So those two were separate. But when I say like following example, at least the friend group I'm in right now, I think people definitely recognize it more. At least the people I hang out with now. I mean, it's not that everyone has taken a decision to stop using their phone for 3 hours a day, but at least they acknowledge it as a problem.
I feel like I'm interviewing you now. But I'm curious because you're at this really interesting point in not only your high school career, but in your life where you have like graduation, particularly this time of year, everything starts to accelerate and you suddenly find that you're doing things for the last time. Like in a week we'll be doing the last family stuff. And then I think there's this sense of wanting to sort of spread your wings and get the heck out of here, and I totally understand that. And then all of a sudden when you realize it's actually happening, a lot of people start backpedaling and they're like, oh no, I'm not quite ready yet. And then there's this both beautiful and kind of brutal thing where graduation day, it's designed to be overwhelming. You know, the faculty and if you haven't seen a Peddie graduation, do you have siblings who might have graduated?
No, I have a younger sibling,
Okay.
but I went to the graduation last year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's a pageant. I mean, it's meant to be, I have all of the beautiful graduation robes that the faculty wear. You guys have to wear these little plasticky things, which aren't quite as nice, but the idea that you'll follow a bagpiper around the campus and there's this great tent which looks like it should have knights in armor and everything. It's designed to be overwhelming. And it's a sort of fitting culmination, but there's also this sort of brutal thing where as soon as it's over, the Peddie wants you gone. You need to be gone in an hour. And like I remember my daughter, both my kids grew up in this house and they're now graduated from the university and gone, but my daughter went down the road to Princeton, and when she graduated, their graduation lasted for 3 days. It was like, it just never ended. And when it was time to go, we didn't have a very long drive, but she wept the entire time. It was just this, so overwhelmed. But you're at this point now where the wheels haven't come off the wagon, meaning that you're not being swept up in all of that stuff. There's still kind of this, the regimen of the normal Peddie day is still intact for another week or two. And it's a time for great reflection. And I wonder if you feel that the school has been a good experience for you. I wonder. I think, to be honest, you probably have there's probably no point in your life when you have a better angle on this than to understand if it's been a good experience. And has it?
Yes.
You think so?
I think it's been incredible.
I'm not like selling something here. I'm just, to be honest, I figure like I would get a more honest answer from someone who is where you are right now than ever. And it's not a conversation that one gets to have very much. So I'm just curious. And you have been here at a most particular time. There's no other generation of students. There's this like maybe year and a half or 2 year window when your experience of this school has dovetailed with the experience of the country being in this perfect storm. If we go down the rabbit hole of politics, we'll never come out, but there's that too. This extraordinary feeling. Hello.
Hello.
Do you need us out of here?
Yes, this is our advisory meeting space.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you give us 5 minutes?
5 minutes.
Very
yes.
good. I'll keep an eye on the time.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Well, there we
That's
are.
okay.
This was close to the timing that I was thinking anyway. So
Okay.
what I've appreciated about this is that we didn't set an agenda.
Yeah, that's what I love. Just go naturally.
So can you answer that question
Yes.
in 5 minutes?
I can. I would say that I'm very grateful and satisfied with my experience at Peddie. I think I've had an amazing time here. And I think one of the things that I really developed at Peddie was a self-image. I would say I was happy as a child, but one thing that was a theme that recurred in my life, at least through middle school, was a poor self-image. That in the back of my mind, I always thought that I was always like bad at sports I played. My friends are always better than me. I was always like a small, skinny kid.
What sport do you do now? You're clearly
I wrestle now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I just felt like I would say I was smart as a kid, but I also went to like a private school in middle school where everyone else was smart. So again, the expectation that I felt like I was below them in that regard as well. So I always had a poor self-image where in the back of my mind, I'd always think that I don't deserve much, that this is who I am and I accept it, and it's just like, it's how it is. You just,
Two final questions, and I realize I'm interested in what you have to say. If you had to do this over again, would you do it differently?
yeah. No. I never like to look back and change anything because it all led to a perfect outcome. But
And I guess the last question then is, do you feel like you're well prepared for going forward?
yes, and I think so because although I had that poor self-image in middle school, as I mentioned before, I think that you know what a positive feedback loop is.
Sure.
So we learned it in bio class, right? Like a negative feedback loop is one where the stimulus stimulus that causes some action,
Yeah.
the action causes the end of the stimulus, right? So for example, when you're cold outside, your body shivers.
Yeah.
When you shiver, you warm up. That's a negative feedback loop because it stops you from shivering.
Yeah.
A positive feedback loop is one where the stimulus that caused the action causes more of the stimulus, so it goes into exponential rate. I would say that self-image acts as a positive feedback loop because if you have a poor self-image, you're not going to take much action or you're not going to have much agency. And because of that, you won't get positive results in your life. But I think the second you look at yourself in a positive way, you will do things that a positive self-image person would do, and you'd get those results. And I would say, as I told you, when I built that first friend group, I immediately had a positive self-image, and I think it exponentiated to me achieving a lot in the last 4 years. Where whenever I want to do something, I go all in, and I go extreme in that. Like for example, that same year I picked up cross country, then I picked up wrestling, and I started to feel like I'm actually for the first time that I deserve more. Like I actually feel like positive about myself because I can go in a room with a difficult practice that maybe 90% of people couldn't do. And then from there, when the following spring I started going to a club where there was really high level athletes and I was worse than all of them, but the fact that I can go there and survive that practice, and then I can go out and when I really want to do something, start a project like this, I can go out and do it. And I really developed that confidence and self-image that I can look back at the last 4 years like it's been really successful.
That outlook is magnetic. People will be drawn to it. And also, frankly, the less you need your friends, the better a friend you can be to them. That's a kind of paradox, but we're social creatures, but we have friends. But the more centered we are in ourselves, the more people turn to us, for example. But also, frankly, the less time we have to spend worrying about ourselves, and the more time we can spend listening to others. So, and you've probably learned in the process of interviews, is if you want people to think you are smart, let them do the talking. On that note, thank you very much. I think we probably better let them in.
Yes.
And then we can go and go to your
Yes.
wherever you need.
Yeah. We'll upload the clip. 100%. Yeah, I really want to learn more about your stories from England, coming to the US. If you ever want to do this again, I'd be love to sit back, listen to more stories.
We could set up another one before graduation if you like.
Perfect.
This was easy, and this is a nice space. So
How's your study as well? If you mentioned you have a study, is that like a nice space as well?
Yeah, to be honest, I would have to clean it up and I'd be embarrassed.
It's up to you.
So
it's up to you.
I think I'm a little more comfortable in a neutral space.
Okay.
But sure. So why don't you? Wednesdays is my best day.
Okay.
And so pick a Wednesday between.
We can do next week if you're free.
I have. It would need to be later in the day.
Okay.
So why don't you?
I'll send you an email and we'll follow from there.
Okay.
Perfect.
I'll let you know.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
If If you enjoyed that episode, then you're going to love this episode right here. Make sure you click here, you watch that video, and don't forget to like and subscribe.